Okay, let's get to work on this Mighty Mick. Here is the 2 sheets of the fin pattern that I printed out of Roxanne. So I'm going to kind of put these together to make a template so I can trace out the fins. And so this is how I do that. There's some index lines here that I'm kind of cut between, and they will match up to this other page. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this thinner printer paper onto some an old poster board here, just to make it a little heavier pattern so it'll last a little longer. So now let's cut it out of the poster board. Okay, there it is. And this is the Mighty Mick 54 millimeter. And that makes a difference because this tab, the through the wall tab, is different depending on the 54-inch millimeter lunar mount or the 38. So that's the fin pattern. Now what you do is you kind of get your plywood and figure out the most efficient use of the wood, and then you cut them out. Okay, there's 3 fins traced out. Okay, let's unwrap these tubes from block and cut them to the proper length for our project here. Need 2 pieces of tube, one cut at 16 inches and one cut at 25. So let me show you kind of how I do this. So I like to make a straight line down the length of this tube to be able to put the marks on. So the way we do that is you go up to the door frame, and mark straight line down that tube. So now, how easy was that? $16. Here's kind of the next trick. Another piece of that poster board as kind of a wrap. So bring it around and keep it tight to the tube. Keep it on your mark and let the edges meet. And holding that tight, you can kind of run the pencil around. That gives you a nice mark around the circumference of the tube that is square. Then let's cut this tube and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, here's our tube that we've got marked. And you can wrap this with tape to kind of act as a guide, but I've found that if I'm very careful, I use a brand new number 11 blade in my X-Acto knife. The blade of X-Acto, and just kind of, you do multiple passes on this, so the idea is to go slowly and kind of watch the end, but you're just kind of rolling the tube. In the first round, you just go carefully and lightly. You're not trying to cut all the way through in one pass. Holding the blade perpendicular, watching the tip of the blade, following that line. You have to kind of be careful because with these spirals, the blade will try and follow it. So that's why we're kind of going lightly. Once you've made the first round, it's kind of a little bit easier because now the slot is kind of started. Maybe a little more pressure. The idea is just to basically just keep turning this. Light pressure, letting the knife cut it. And I am adding more pressure here as it cuts in. Pieces starting to kind of break through a little bit. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but it's starting to kind of chunk through. The blade's going through in some spots here. There it is. So that's makes a nice, neat, square cut. So now I should be able to get the nose cone, and this is where you want it to really square up nice and neat. It looks like that turned out pretty good. This is the piece that we're keeping. Then we do the same thing to the other one. The other piece is going to be 25 inches long. So I'll go ahead and do that and get it cut, and then we'll get back to building a rocket. Okay, so we still need to kind of figure out the electronics bay. There's the switch band that goes on that. That'll make sense when we get to that part. But this is 1 inch wide piece of that body tube. This is the coupler that makes up the electronics bay, and it is 8 inches long. So the center of that, of course, is 4. If we have an inch long, go 1/2 inch on each side. So that will give the marks to line up the switch band. So this guy, sometimes you kind of have to roll the edges of this a little bit. So let's when these tubes are cut, it kind of leaves like a little burr. So I just use the back of the knife to kind of scrape that back a little bit so it'll kind of go on there a little easier. It's really just kind of get that burr down. That slides on there a little easier. We just made those marks, so let's center that up. Body tube anyway, so that fits in like that. So now let's measure and make sure that that is 42 inches long. Yep. Okay. Let's take this apart. Let's put those aside for a second. Let's see how this. Here I fit the electronics bay. Get its pieces out. You buy this separate from lock, but it has all the pieces for electronics bay. This is all the hardware that comes with these tubes. A couple of pieces of all thread, a little baggie of hardware. There's the sled. I'll have to sand and kind of fix that a little bit. So I'll kind of show you how this all works. Little laser cut pieces here. And they fit in these little slots. Of course, the last one is the one that's tight, right? And we'll go through and we'll glue this. We'll probably give everything a good coat of epoxy just to protect it from moisture, from absorbing moisture and stuff. So you've got these two bulkheads. There are instructions. we do put a nut on here first. So everything will be tightened up with wrenches and a little coating of thin epoxy to kind of seal it up and act as a Loctite on the threads. To kind of just show you what it's going to look like, and I've already forgot this nut that goes on first. Okay, so the pieces of all thread go in the sled like this. And what we'll do is we'll mount, the battery, any switches, the altimeter, everything gets mounted to that. This goes together like, sorry. I'm choking like this. For now, I'll just put together with a couple of nuts so you can kind of see how it actually goes. This fits in here. On the other end of things, and you'll put it together with washers and wing nuts. But this will be the electronics bay. So we'll have to get some, hole for a switch. We'll have to also make sure that it's ported so the altimeter can read the atmospheric pressure, because that's how it works. As it goes up in altitude, the barometric pressure decreases. It measures the actual altitude based on that barometric pressure. And then when it sees the altitude, kind of basically the velocity, the altitude peaks, it will fire an ejection charge, which is actually in the fin can, the lower part of the rocket, which will be a drogue parachute. Then it falls. As the rocket falls, it's still sensing the altitude through the air pressure. When it reaches a predetermined point, which is typically set to about 500 feet altitude above ground level, then it will fire the main charge, poof, which will let the main parachute come out of the nose cone. So that's what that's all about. So that's kind of basically how that goes together. So the next thing to do is to start probably cutting fins. And for that, I'll get out one of my favorite tools, the old Japanese pull saw. We'll be back for some of that.